Hi, my name is Alyssa Vanstock, and I'll be presenting the end of chapter case for chapter 3, questions 2, 4, and 6. So for the case summary, it states, after Dan's analysis of East Coast Yachts cash flow at the end of our previous chapter, Larissa approached Dan about the company's performance and future growth plans. First, Larissa wants to find out how East Coast Yachts is performing relative to its peers. Additionally, she wants to find out the future financing necessary to fund the company's growth. In the past, East Coast Yachts experienced difficulty in financing its growth plan, in large part because of poor planning. In fact, the company had to turn down several large jobs because its facilities were unable to handle the additional demand. Larissa hoped that Dan would be able to estimate the amount of capital the company would have to raise next year so that East Coast Yachts would be better prepared to fund its expansion plans. They also provided East Coast Yachts 2020 income statement, balance sheet, and the industry ratios, which can be viewed on page 80 and 81. So for question 2, it asked for me to calculate all the ratios listed in an industry table for East Coast Yachts. So I calculated the current ratio, quick ratio, total asset turnover, inventory turnover, receivables turnover, debt ratio, debt equity ratio, equity multiplier, interest coverage, profit margin, return on assets, and the return on equity. As you can see, I provided formulas for each ratio, and then what information I received from the financial statements provided, and then calculated the ratios. For question 4, it asked me to calculate the sustainable growth rate for East Coast Yachts, calculate the external funds needed, and prepare pro forma income statements and balance sheets assuming growth at precisely this rate. Recalculate the ratios in the previous question and what I observed from calculating those ratios. So first, I calculated the sustainable growth rate, which I used the ROE that I calculated previously, and then calculated B by taking the retained earnings and dividing it by net income, which gave me an 18.23% growth rate. Then I calculated the external funds needed for this growth rate, which I first calculated the profit margin, and then the change in sales, and then the projected sales. For the EFN, I got 28,828,282.77 cents. So I used the growth rate and multiplied the current 2020 sales, which was 550,424,000, in which case I got 650,790,917. Then for the cost, I added up the cost of goods sold, selling, general, and administrative expenses, and depreciation, and divided that from the current sales to get the percentage of sales that all the costs are, which I got 87.37%. I multiplied the projected sales by the 87.3% to get the pro forma cost. Then I did the same with the balance sheet. I took the 2020 balance sheet, current assets, fixed assets, and then accounts payable, and divided those totals by the sales to get what percentage those totals are of sales and multiplied those percentages by the projected sales to get the pro forma balance sheet. And that gave me an EFN of 28,816,000 and 85700, which is different than the EFN I calculated previously, because there's things that are only assumed in that formula. Then I recalculated all the ratios with the pro forma balance sheet and income statement, and I observed that there isn't really much difference between the ratios I calculated in question 2, since it is growing at a sustainable growth rate, so the ratios shouldn't really change anyway. So lastly, for question 6, it stated that most assets can be increased as a percentage of sales. For instance, cash can be increased by any amount. However, fixed assets often must be increased in specific amounts because it is impossible as a practical matter to buy part of a new plant or machine. In this case, a company has a staircase or lumpy fixed cost structure. Assume that East Coast Yachts is currently producing at 100% of capacity, and sales are expected to grow at 20%. As a result, to expand production, the company must set up an entirely new line at a cost of $95 million. Prepare the pro forma income statement and balance sheet. What is a new EFN with these assumptions? What does this imply? And what does this imply about capacity utilization for East Coast Yachts next year? So, I multiplied the 2020 sales by the 20% and got $660,580,800. Multiplied that by the 87.3% in cost, and got the $577,086,539. I did the same thing with the balance sheet. However, I did add a $95,000 in with total fixed assets, which ended up giving me an EFN of $129,059,904. So when asked what this implied about the capacity utilization next year, I stated since there's a large EFN, East Coast Yachts will need to raise a significant amount of money to support the sales growth, since they're implementing a new production line. This will allow them to produce more yachts to meet projected sales. Also, in calculating the capacity utilization, since they are at 100% sales, I calculated that they needed 0.7547, or they needed 57 cents for every dollar in sales. If they wanted to grow, they would need to add more. That is all I have. Thank you for listening.